Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me in another of my wonderful interview series. Today I'm talking to a gentleman who sent me a book, and here it is, Open Your Mind to Change, the guidebook to the Great Awakening, which was fascinating. He said that he'd been watching my channel and he wanted to send me this book, and I said, well, I'm more than happy to do that. So my guest today is Martin Geddes. Martin, hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
It's
Pleasure.
very kind of you to send me a book. I love books. I'm a great reader, and I've read most of it. It seems to be a book of articles or theses, not theses. What do you call them when you write? I see, I'm rubbish at this. But anyway, it's a series of that, and it goes right up to 2020, so it's quite recent.
Yes.
And I was sort of getting closer to the end, thinking, oh, he's going to talk about the pandemic and, you know, all the stuff that's coming on. It's a fascinating thing. Before we get into that, though, let me just, according to the back of the book, it tells me something about you, because we've never met and I don't really know you, but your name has popped up in the past, so that's been
in a good way.
Yeah, and people have been saying that to me now. They're saying, "Oh, Richard, I've seen your name pop up," and I think, "Oh my God, you know, that's a bit of a worry." So it says here, you were given a computer from the age 11. You went off and did a degree in mathematics and computation. In the 1990s, you were building banking systems and you were doing IT consultation. So that's quite interesting with all this sort of banking problems that we're seeing thrust down at us, and the digital banks and the central banks. So we might get into a bit of that. You went to Kansas in America, of course, for 3 years, and you became a guru on the future of the internet and a founder of Hypervoice Consortium. So I'm not quite sure what that. Yeah. And then you moved into exploring conspiracy theories, developing concerns about privacy and corruption. And now you're a leading authority on the unfolding silent war against mass media propaganda, corrupt intelligence, and secret societies. Just the sort of bloke I need to talk to on the show. Because
what an unlikely journey it is.
It's not, you know, when you're at school, you just sort of go, what would you like to be, Martin?
I said an actuary.
An actuary?
I'd rather die than be an actuary now. But anyway, no offense to the actuaries who are watching and listening, and but it's... So
that is what a career. And so, so your mind is clearly open to the Great Awakening, whatever that is. So let me just start then. What is the Great Awakening?
Right. And my answer to this question has been shifting over time.
Right.
If you'd asked me 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said it's an intellectual activity, which is about becoming, in your mind, more cognizant of the lies we're being told and the corruption behind the scenes and the hidden hands that are operating and hidden history, etc. So it's about what you knew. And I wrote the book as a series of essays over a couple of years. And I picked out the most relevant essays to put them together into a book. But that was just documenting my own unfolding understanding and journey. And in the last year or two, I've come to a different perspective or understanding, which is I think that this really is a spiritual war, and trying to understand what that means. But I now see it as the Great Awakening is a spiritual revival, but not necessarily not a religious thing. So religion and spirituality, two very different things. And it's about re-establishing our foundations of rationality and what's righteous. Because totalitarianism and evil and wickedness likes to undermine that. It gives us a false logic and a false morality. And also reconnecting with what you might call our innate nature, our divinity, whatever you want to label it. Because evil sells us on a scheme which is you're not divine and you're not infinitely worthy, you're only finitely worthy. But if you tread on these people's toes and on those people's shoulders and do these slightly wrong things and compromise yourself, you can have that promotion and that BMW and that whole day. And it's like, and you get there and you find actually, well, it's a nice try, but if you now do these things, you'll be a little bit higher. Yeah, it's and you never get there because it's selling back to you what you already had at the outset. So, so I think the Great Awakening is about understanding the nature of good and evil, and at its extremes, holy and unholy. Um, and within that, there's a playground, which is a playground about mind and body, which is understanding everything that's happening in our visible world in front of us, which could be court corruption or how the money system works, whatever. But without this framing, this holding pen of the spiritual, particularly the holy unholy axis, you don't make sense of it. So that's the arc of my learning journey was to transcend my own background as a fairly hardcore intellectual. I used to be doing the algebra of telecom network performance.
Oh, blimey.
Yeah, exactly. I've got a few more noise to sell to you. And standing on stage at big telecom conferences saying you've got it all wrong and you've missed all the foundations. And stepping back and applying the same skill set of understanding what people are missing about the world, but to a much wider problems domain of geopolitics, world affairs. So does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So when you say spiritual, I mean, and you differentiate between religious, because religions
Yeah.
come in all sorts of different forms
Yeah.
and have sort of doctrines and rules and sort of regulations or rituals and things
Yeah.
associated with it. You're sort of stripped all that away. It's a very much more personal thing, I assume.
Ye- Yes and no. So I think mind and body are something that's inside of us. Yeah, my
Yeah.
body, my mind. Yeah, it's I think the spirit is like where you're heading to. So maybe give an example of this, which
Mm.
is in relationships. Why do some couples stay together and why do some move apart? Now, in the naive way I used to see relationships between us, a couple stays together if they're compatible, and it's about the attraction between that couple. Yeah, it's
Right. Yeah.
and if you have a relationship problem, you need to think about the relationship between the two of you. But that isn't working. Why isn't it working? And it's kind of like a paradox. Well, imagine if you put two ping pong balls into a stream way up in the mountains, yeah, and they naturally flow down at roughly the same rate, at the same place, at the same time, because they have the same destination, which is the ocean.
Right.
So the spirit is the ocean, yeah. And if a ping pong ball wants to go upstream, bounce around across the banks, get pumped around to the next valley, that's a different spirit. So it's the nature of the spirit, it's the destination or the ultimately what you worship that holds you together. And the paradox is that by having the same spirit and focusing entirely upwards, say, towards um, uh, higher powers, whatever, towards righteousness, you naturally stay together. So actually, by taking the focus away from the horizontal, which is the relationships between us, and putting it instead onto the vertical, which is where we're going, or what we hold in the highest, we naturally stay together. So, and couples who don't see that they can't see that their problem is a spiritual problem. And a good example would be maybe if one's had the vaccine and the other one hasn't. So one has one set of values and the other one hasn't. That's an example of a spiritual divide. Uh, and that's why it's hard for some couples to stay together. It's not because they're not compatible in the mind and body sense, it's because they're different spirit. And I've had to learn this the hard way from my own personal and family history.
So yes, you were your mother, I think you told me
Yeah.
just before we started recording, was involved with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, we're all, I say we're all, a lot of us will be familiar with
Yeah.
people banging on your door, all sorts of different people trying to convert you or get you to change
Yeah.
your mind on stuff. So, can you tell us a little bit about how that
Right.
influenced your life as a young lad?
Right. So the story is that my mother was Jehovah's Witness, been raised that way. My grandfather had joined the JWs in like 1940s or 50s. And and she met my dad. And the only person from my mother's side of the family at my parents' wedding was my mother. So my father's family boycotted the wedding. So my
Oh,
mother's family boycotted the wedding because she was marrying outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses and also a Navy man.
right.
Um, so when I was born a few years later, my father was welcomed into the family because presumably he wanted me. Um, but my mum broke a promise to my dad, which was to raise any children Church of England. and followed the lead of my uncle, who said, "Come back into the Jehovah's Witnesses." Um, so my uncle kind of he spiritually cuckolded my dad, yeah, and I was the one, the older child, left with the unreconciled spiritual difference between my parents. Yeah, so and it was unspeakable. So I was dragged off to Jehovah's Witness meetings, which I have to say are actively boring. And it's not just passively boring. I remember sitting there in the meeting as a little kid, putting my little finger around the little buttons on the back of the upholstery of the chairs, and yeah, how long does this go on, right? It's like, uh, but I've got an innate, um, from that experience. If you turn up to me with wearing all lovely clothes and with a lovely authority you're appealing to, and in agreement with everyone else, and you speak with eloquence and no swear words, and it's very persuasively and totally sincerely, I'll ignore you, right?
Oh,
Because because clearly you're part of a religious cult. Yeah, it's like uh, and the fact that everyone agrees and they all are respectable means nothing to me. Yeah, and that's how I could do my work in telecoms because I was being a dissident and a renegade and a rebel in telecoms industry. But that was easy. Yeah, it's uh, so what I've realized is many of the struggles I've had in life, I've tried to find mind and body solutions to them over the years. And I won't go into the gruesome details, but I've realized in the last year or two that actually the underlying thing was a spiritual difference. And because the spiritual difference between my parents was unspeakable, I ended up recapitulating that pattern in my life and making it unspeakable down the road. Um, so it's been an utter shock for me to start finding myself writing essays, not just about crime and corruption and psychopaths and paedophilia or whatever, but about ideas like Holy Spirit, which yeah, even the G word, right? It's like uh, and divinity, because I'm finding those concepts are actually relevant to this problem domain that we're investigating, and without a spiritual language, which is about the telos or the direction which everything heads to, the ocean. Yeah. If we can't talk about the ocean, then it's hard to talk about the stream.
right.
Um, so so something bigger than us, the ocean, is out there, and I'm now realizing, ah, So because my mum was in this religious cult, I ended up throwing away the whole bucket of spiritual stuff. No way, go away, keep that away from me. Horrible. Um, and now I'm having to kind of retrace my steps a bit, and I'm realizing that the religious way of thinking it keeps you maybe if there's a Bible here somewhere, keeps you in the word but not the spirit. And there's a lot of people who've learned the lines of the script, but they're
They're not.
actors, they're hypocrites. A hypocrite and an actor, same word. Yeah, it's like so they're acting out all of the notional behaviors and doctrines and rituals of doing the righteous and right thing. But what they're trying to do is like a contract with God, right? It's like if I do no drugs, don't sleep around, whatever it is, yeah. It's like I wear nice clothes, I don't swear, um, then I get the rewards. But that's not how it works. Yeah, it's like uh, it's a covenant, not a contract. It's offer of grace and mercy and forgiveness for how useless we are, and it doesn't work that way. So I've realized I actually observed a lot of people around me, whether they're notionally liberal, intellectual atheists, whatever. They all are exhibiting a highly prideful, religious mindset. Yeah, and for intellectuals in particular, they're extremely vulnerable to propaganda. There's a famous book by Jacques Ellul, 1962, called Propaganda, which describes this phenomenon. Because intellectuals are the ones who need all the talking points for dinner conversations.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Um, so this religious spirit is one that I innately recognize, but I didn't have a language to describe it, apart from just running away from it.
Yes. So
But now,
you talk about a bit of that sort of thing in your book, where you talk about the intellectuals or an intellectual mind, but also an intuitive mind, and
yes,
that we've almost forgotten the intuitive mind
we have.
because it's the intellectual is something that other people around can easily hang their hats on, and you can share familiar topics,
Yeah.
whereas something intuitive perhaps is more difficult to converse with somebody else about, or
Right.
they might think you're a bit mad.
There's different kinds of intelligence. It's like
Right,
uh, kind of a crude way is the intuitive intelligence. It could be manifested in art, but it could also be street smarts. Can you tell when you're being conned? Yeah,
right.
in a deal. It's like, uh, and for me, I find the intellectual side quite easy. Easy. We all have our gifts, and
Mm.
uh, I went and did a degree in mathematics. I spent 20 odd years, 25 years in the tech and telecoms industry. Um, so I came out of university like a lopsided crustacean with one big intellectual claw and chop your intellectual problem to pieces in no time at all. And this little withered intuitive intelligence arm. It's and it took a few years ago when I was utterly broke, and I was going for my little daily walks and posting the pictures on social media, taking with an old digital camera I had, and people liked them because they're a bit playful and fun and appreciative of the beauty around us. And I've accidentally found myself with a second career is too strong a word, but a second vocation calling as an artist doing pretty photos. Um, and that process of going out for my little daily walks, walk is the first objective, photo second objective, selling anything about 10th on the list. Yeah, it's like uh, but people nag me enough. They wanted prints and calendars, and
Mm.
then they got them in the end. It's like, but that's helped to rebalance me. So
It's
it
so
isn't all.
interesting. It's so interesting you say that because my channel started on walks,
Yeah.
which I filmed,
Hmm.
and I while I used to sort of have the philosophy that I went out to make a video, I didn't happen to go for a walk and then thought, oh, by the way, I'll film it. I did do it the other way around because I was trying to build up a following but my thing was to try to encourage other people to get outside and get away from everything so that they could just walk and think and talk and with friends or on their own. But I was also filming, and it does very much rebalance you. And now that I'm doing all of this, where I suppose I'm more intellectually sort of working out what's going on in the world with all these weird things that we keep reading about. I get only if we keep looking for them, which is, I suppose, another argument. You keep looking for something, you're going to find it. But going out, I miss that now more than ever. And as soon as the weather is a bit nice and we've started to have a few good days, you just want to get out and, hug a tree, walk down a beautiful country lane and experience life again, whereas you're in this sort of noise all the time. Is that sort of the sort of thing you're
Yeah.
referring to, where work is kind of low down?
Quick point of process. Just make sure, are we actually recording this? We,
Yes.
okay, it doesn't show on the screen. So let's make sure.
I record it differently
Okay, excellent.
from the Zoom that I'm using.
Excellent, excellent. Because I've done quite a few Zoom record. I'm thinking, hang on a minute, he hasn't pressed the record button.
Present,
Okay, I
present,
want to
yeah.
check that.
No, I
Okay,
have a little thing here that says
ace,
recording in
fabulous.
the studio.
Okay, so hang on a minute. Okay,
Yeah.
because it wouldn't be the first time actually I've done an
No,
interview.
no, I've done that. I have actually done that before myself.
Okay,
When
so
you've gone, oh, can we start again? And it's so embarrassing.
it's all right. It's like uh, so I think it's back to it's back to the spiritual thing. She's like going through these little walks. It's about um, because what we're trying to do is hone our perception of the world, because there are people out there and powers that want us to not perceive what they're doing. Right? So a few years ago, I came across this subject called ponerology, which is the academic study of evil and psychopaths, and pathocracy, which is their culture and systems of power. And what evil naturally likes to do is hide. Bad, dark power doesn't want to be seen. That's just how it works. So there are bad people, and they have business plans, conspiracies, um, and they work together. But critical to how they operate is to subvert our perception of what they're up to, so that we think that what is right is what's wrong, and what's good is bad, and what's true is false. Yeah, so that they invert right and wrong. So they create this like upside down world, which is internally consistent, but is actually completely false. And they do that by subverting our perception. So I think the process of going out on little walks and really paying attention to the world, like the little juxtapositions and the textures and the patterns and the colors and the noises and being with it. It gives you it's a skill of seeing things for how they really are, yeah, not how you want to see them, or you can so separate out your own interpretation from what's actually there a little bit. Uh, and I found that repeatedly practicing that skill in the physical world also helps me understand the structure of what you call the virtual world, or the information landscapes we're presented with. Um,
So
so
could you give me an example then of the upside down world that is not the
right,
real world?
okay, so the easy one that's contemporary is the masks.
Right.
So the inverted morality was this saves grandma, and the inverted logic is that there's a dangerous pathogen around, and this barrier is going to save you from it. Yeah, it's and there's a whole bunch of talking points that all interlock behind those. Yeah, it's uh, but when I was on a little tech private closed group, yeah, in the past I was say I was senior in the tech industry would be wrong, but I was well known. Yeah, it's like it's so you get invited to all kinds of little conferences and little groups. It's and when the COVID came along, I was putting my hand up saying I'm sorry, but these masks, like all the evidence in the past and all the reviews and meta-analyses, they all say doesn't help. I got kicked out. Yeah, people don't want to hear that. Yeah, it's
No.
so it's back to the sense of identity. So what evil does is it sells us an identity. Yeah, you're a Labour or Conservative, LGBTQ or whatever it is. Yeah, it's like it's you're Jehovah's Witness. You're not. Yeah, it's um and we start to identify with that, and we have an in group and an out group, and the out group are the scapegoats, who we then say are all the bad people. Yeah, it's so we can be the good people.
So
And
it's that
it
sort of
divides us.
divide and conquer
Yeah,
type thing,
exactly,
pushing people against each other.
exactly. It's so what I've also noticed that I do a slightly naughty subversive thing, right? So at the bottom of each like newsletter I put out there, which are often on controversial subjects, conspiracy theories. At the bottom of each one, I put a really pretty picture I've made. And the subversive thing I'm doing is saying, look, I should you, the skeptic, who are coming along and seeing the conspiracy theory write up for the first time, hang on a minute, you really like that picture of seagulls. um, maybe we share something in common. Maybe
Mm.
we aren't quite as different as you think we are. It's so I'm using a shared aesthetic of beauty to kind of punch through the divide between us, um, and reconnect to other people and say, look, I'm still in the same world as you. I'm still fundamentally human.
So do you find when you put out your newsletters, people are they're coming because they have an opposing view and they want to challenge you, or are they already on board with what your newsletter is likely to be saying? Are they already
Right.
themselves?
So I've evolved it over time. Uh, so as you alluded to, I was doing hardcore tech and telecom stuff, and some of it was policy matters about network neutrality, whatever in telecoms. About 10 plus years ago, um, I got an interest in the future of voice. Actually, 15 years ago, longer time, the future of voice communications. Actually, nearly 20 years ago. So 2003, I started my first blog. And human voice communications opened up a whole new realm of privacy, power, artificial intelligence, sensors, sensory computing. So that's the thing I started the Hypervoice Consortium around with a colleague, and looking at the future of all of that stuff.
Mm.
And that's what led me into thinking about the nature of power and evil and psychopaths and abuse and how this could all go wrong. I was still quite naive to how the world really worked. Uh, but that's what set me off on this path of this journey of understanding. And I've taken my audience on this journey, so people can conceive of ideas like corruption and abuse of power, and they understand that some conspiracy theories are real. So, like in this country, Hillsborough disaster, yeah,
Mm.
it was initially all blamed on the supporters, and we know now that wasn't true.
Mm.
Uh, Jimmy Savile, that was a wild conspiracy theory. Um, but and also about 10, 12 years ago, I started looking into the events of September 11th, 2001, etc., applying my professional skill set of deconstructing complex problems, information landscapes, going, this doesn't add up. Doesn't make sense. I don't believe it. Yeah, I don't know what's true, but this doesn't add up. And that led me into kind of a whole, there was a point about 5 years ago where there was a separating of ways. And I had to leave my whole telecoms career because the moment you start talking about pedophiles and the really dark stuff and blackmail networks and how things really work, that's not very popular.
No, I can imagine. And quite
So
scary, I should think, for people.
there's a loss of sense of safety. Um, uh, for me, for quite a few years, I knew something was off. Couldn't quite put my finger on it. Uh, I knew it wasn't the standard groups or whatever that that were given blame. I knew something else was happening. I knew it was psychopaths. Yeah, I knew it was criminals. Um, and it was when like Donald Trump was elected. At first, oh, boring, loudmouth billionaire, whatever. Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, it's like I knew Hillary Clinton was corrupt, but I didn't care. And it was only so around 2017 when these Q drops started. I started looking into that and documenting it from a
What are Q drops?
right. So I'll give you my interpretation. So that there was information being released on a pretty obscure social media site, which was pretty anarchic, called 4chan. And they're digitally signed, so we know they come from the same source. And they were saying all kinds of quite remarkable things. And they were syncing in with things happening in the world, which indicated that they were coming from an official source, a quasi-official source. And so the object that these things objectively exist. Yeah, it's like it's a source of information. My sense of it is it's a back channel that has been opened between military intelligence and a select part of the public to understand and foresee what's going on in an environment where we've been unwittingly caught in a very long-running covert war, a war of infiltration of all our trusted institutions. And becoming aware of what's really going on in the depths of the subversion and Epstein Island. It's like
So is this like the morals have changed, our standards have changed, what some people call the long march through the institutions from the left point of view, victim culture, the woke agenda. Is that the sort of thing you're referring to?
that's the surface presentation.
Right. Okay. So it's deeper than that.
It's much deeper.
Right.
Now, there's an interesting debate to be had between what is engineered versus what's emergent. So psychopaths like to find other psychopaths. They work together. They have their own effectively moral code. They're very legalistic minded. In the good book, it talks about Pharisees. It's not changed, right? It's like they have there's an implicit set of doctrines they have, a revelation of the method and mutually assured destruction through blackmail. They have their own morality of psychopaths. So Epstein Island is part of that whole blackmail network system. So once you understand that a lot of the people that you see as politicians, some of them are being blackmailed, some of them being intimidated, some being bribed, some of them are honest, but they can't be effective in an environment that's corrupted. So there are many good people in bad systems, but the systems are being subverted and attacked.
What do they want? I mean, you're effectively painting sort of good people and evil people, and good people really just want to sort of have a nice life and get on with things and enjoy their family and work hard, eat well, and those sort of things, and having aspirations for that sort of thing, I imagine. That's where I'd place myself in that sort of area. But the evil people, I never quite know what it is, that motivates them, but what do they really want? What's the end goal that they're all working in the dark corners to achieve? Or is that
That's actually quite a difficult question to answer. And there's a certain humility I need in attempting to answer it because I feel I've only got parts of the puzzle still. even after all
Right.
these years of looking at this thing, right? Um, uh, so I think that there's almost like an information theoretic nature of evil. It has to compartmentalize, it has to form this triangular structure where all the control and visibility is drawn up to the top, and it always overreaches and it always collapses. So in cybernetics, there's things like viable systems theory that talk about how these systems scale, right? So if you want to have evil is about control and power.
Hmm.
Um, and systems of hidden power have to be structured in certain ways to scale. So evil has to follow certain patterns in order for it to persist and grow and parasitize the rest of our society. And it isn't about individual character. It's about psychopathic values and systems propagating themselves. It's a bit like what Richard Dawkins talks about memes or memetics. It's a mimetic thing that happens. It's like viral ideas. Um, but the aspect of this that I genuinely don't understand. So we know that consciousness is non-local. We know that consciousness affects matter. There's the good book. It talks all about uh, principalities and uh, I've seen enough from people who can have interesting dreams, do remote viewing, whatever it is, demonic possession, all kinds of wacky stuff out there, which is not my area of
Mm.
expertise. Yeah. So I wouldn't normally talk about it on a video in public. But I'm having an increasing level of respect for it and realizing I know very, very little. Um, so I've moved on from a sort of naive, simplistic view of good people, bad people, psychopaths, and it's to understanding there's like a cybernetic view of this and psychopathic cultures and how they grow. To okay, this really is spiritual warfare, and there's a whole aspect to this problem domain that I'm just not well equipped to talk about. So I
Okay.
feel like I'm having to kind of go back to school and I'm starting to reconcile the physics, the metaphysics, consciousness, all the bits of this. But it's really quite hard because it requires letting go of the wacky idea that we may have been educated.
Well, we are in a strange. I mean, my journey on here has been that I started to ask questions because it felt like things were just not right since Brexit, really, where we were very much in this country polarized, and
Yes.
we had a referendum, and we just found. I found personally that people were acting very strangely in they had to make a decision about whether they wanted to be in the EU or not in the EU, and it suddenly turned into being back in the English Civil War, where
Hmm.
brother was against brother, or families were divided on such a what seemed to be a simplistic sort of disagreement, really, whether you wanted that. But some people became
Right.
incredibly passionate. Then it seems to have escalated, and we went through the pandemic, and that increased a lot of people's awareness that things were being pushed at us that didn't seem quite right. We didn't normally mandate a vaccine, for example, or
Yeah.
encourage people to take a medical service in such an extreme way. And then when there were some difficulties with it, the government, or in the past, people would be quite happy to ask questions about it and say, why is this happening? And yet there seems to be a complete shutdown, even though the evidence is just hemorrhaging all over social media and everywhere else. But in the mainstream media, they're keeping quiet about it, refusing to talk about it. And in the government, you've got Andrew Bridgen being principally the only one who stood up, and then is sort of thrown to the lions and say, well, you're an idiot, so we don't want anything to do with you. So the world seems to be very topsy-turvy at the moment. And I
Yeah.
think people are wakening up in perhaps a slightly different way. But I've been getting a lot of people talking about religious people saying we're at the end now. In biblical terms, it's the Revelations. We're waiting for the new Messiah. There's going to be the great, whatever it is, people fly up. I'm not a religious person in that way. But also I get other people who are saying the same as you're saying. It's very much a spiritual thing, which is
Yeah.
difficult for me to understand when you see everything in a very physical way,
Hmm.
like with the mandating of this and passports and digital IDs.
Yeah.
But I do feel that a lot of people are very, very much aware of something, whether they want to face it, and they know, digital banks? Do I, I
Yes.
just liked it the way it was. Why are we foisting all this?
Hmm.
So would you then be saying that all these things are sort of part of this evil process
Well,
of control? Because we feel like we're being controlled and pushed ever more.
yes. So part of the learning in this is about this transhumanist agenda, which I didn't appreciate the level of threat that was involved. So about 6, 7, 8 years ago, when I was writing about this hyper voice idea and the future of voice communications, me and the colleague came up with this idea of a guardian avatar, which would be like a digital guardian angel that would help to protect our identity and manage our privacy and perform ethical actions on our behalf. And I now realize that's utterly naive because all I'd done was created a higher order target for psychopaths to go after, and they would
Oh, right.
subvert it with their own regulations and morality, false morality, and would be even deeper trouble. So the transhumanist agenda has there's a whole series of mechanisms of nanotech, biotech, genetic engineering, etc., graphene, everything that enable us to create new control mechanisms. But it's ultimately about putting a small group of people in a godlike position to engineer new life. And there are all kinds of rumors about nasty stuff happening in underground labs with chimeras and highly unethical and illegal experimentation and cloning and things that we would not like to hear about. Uh, so I think there's also a huge amount of evidence that we have a great deal of hidden history. And a lot of our history has been rewritten by the victors. And quite how we got here, I'm not entirely sure, but I know that what I was taught was probably wrong. Um, and and it looks like, you know, there's some things I think that can't be true, Martin. That's just way too wacky. Yeah, but the evidence is too much for it. There's like cyclical cataclysms that have been happening and multiple civilizations that have been around before us. Um, and so I know I'm back at I feel like I'm back in kindergarten, an early learning class. Like, okay, I don't actually know much at all. Um, and in order to figure out what's really going on, I need to accept that a large body of essential knowledge and information has been held in secret societies, and they've got secrets that are worth having, and you don't have them. So in order to make sense of the world and the symbols and symbolism and the systems and processes, even like the legal system, I was utterly naive to it, and how our legal personas were being used to strip us of our innate rights and subvert our common law self-sovereignty. Uh, I had no idea, and now I've seen it in my personal battles with the council and the police and TV licensing and all kinds of entities. Yeah, I can't believe that. Really? They're running fake courts. They're really running fake courts. Yes, they are. And so the interview you did, was it William Kite?
Mm, mm.
Really interesting. I can't recommend it too highly to your viewers. I hardly ever watch videos actually. I don't have a TV. But that was one of the very few that I compellingly said, "Whoa, yeah," and I would actually play it again. He was telling us something critical and profound about the nature of the jury system and our innate right to decide not only whether someone is guilty or innocent, but to decide the facts and the law, which
Yes.
means that conscience comes back into it.
Yes, the fact that your peers can judge whether the law that you are being brought to
Yeah,
is
yes.
actually worth keeping or not, and that
Right,
you may not have even broken any real law, as it were, or natural law,
right.
and that piece of statute might be just totally irrelevant, so you could get rid of that. And in fact, funnily enough, I recorded an interview with William this morning as I record this, and it's just gone out earlier. So we're desperately trying to sort of keep that conversation.
Right.
Because people seem to, this is one of the problems is people want a bit of paper so that they can say to the policeman as he stops them for speeding or something, well, according to my rights, here it is.
Yeah.
But it's more the philosophy of a natural law that we have a constitution which has been codified, if you like,
Yeah.
with the Magna Carta, but if everybody is talking about it and aware of it as it was once taught in schools,
Hmm.
people couldn't blind you and and also it was about smaller governments and people taking more responsibility for themselves and saying, do you know what, we can educate our own children if we don't like this system that you've offered us, which is very nice, thanks very much, but actually, you know, there's too many people in the classroom. My son doesn't quite fit in with them. I think a little smaller school with a couple of things, we might change the curriculum. We may, you know, do something completely different. But they're intelligent kids. They're going to learn. They're sponges, and so that sort of taking back the control and taking back our lives in many ways from what's happened. But it does seem, on the one hand, it seems like, you know, everything's being thrust down at you by a bigger source, but at the same time, we've allowed it.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
you know, and that's the responsibility that we can grasp. You know, if you don't want face recognition technology in your supermarket, effectively don't go to the supermarket. Go to the little shop on the corner shop. Let him grow, and he won't put the face recognition stuff in you know, and all of that. And you can have a nice chat with him. But people have got to sort of take back that essence again. The power is in their hands.
You have to be accountable. So
yes,
you mentioned earlier about this divide, but maybe it's Brexit or the jabs or the masks, and the divide is between the innate morality of natural law or God's law and this new normal. So we're offered a series of. I was doing the same as everyone else. I was going along to get along. I wasn't being controversial. I followed all the rules. Well, we know that where that ends. We've seen this movie before, and it's not good. The ending is always sad. And I've learned something really important. This last week. So the way we have an enemy, right? We have people out there who want to subvert. They want to steal our efforts, our energies, our children, our goods, our services, everything. Yeah, it's they're people who want to enslave you. They don't like you, and they're willing to use unbounded levels of deception and subversion and violence to do it. And history shows this to be true. Now, what they have to do, though, in the psychopathic morality, they have to tell you before they do it what they're going to do to you. And if you don't object, they treat that as consent, tacit consent.
Right. Now, so if you don't rebut it, you know, they basically you then acquiesced.
And that's built into even like our legal system. If you don't respond within 21 days, whatever it is, to some claim, you've accepted it as fact. Now, you might say that's psychopathic, but here's the aha I had this week where a wise person told me, Martin, if a dog comes and bites you on the leg and you don't whack it on the nose, you've just told the dog that either your din-dins or your plaything. Yeah, it's like, and if you don't send it away and bash it one, you are now complicit. You've accepted that.
Right.
And it's no good passing a law saying dogs shouldn't bite, because guess what? Dogs bite. Yeah, it's like psychopaths bite, dogs bite. So in natural law, we think this is all unfair and it's not right, and therefore it's not actually a proper agreement. But in natural law, it is.
Same with children, though, wouldn't it? It'd be the same with children. If your child is unruly, and you don't give it boundaries, and you say, right, if you go any more than that, I'm going to send you to your room. And if you don't carry out the threat that you've given, the kid then knows, well, you're never going to carry it out, so I can keep pushing you and annoy you to the nth degree. Right. And you set that boundary, and then you know then everybody knows where they are, sort of thing. Same with the dog, it's whack on the dog, and he knows, I mustn't do that because I'll get.
Here's the rub, right? Which is, in one model, we are fully accountable for what we do. And that includes the eternal vigilance for those who want to bite us, and to back them away. In the other model, we let go of some of our accountability and we hand it off to the state or the church or someone else. Yeah, it's like, and then we become charges and we become charged. Yeah, funny enough, we get bills from everyone, don't we?
Yes.
It's like, so you have to make a choice. This is the fundamental choice. If you want to reclaim your sovereignty and as a divine being, you also have to be accountable. Yes. So that my mum, bless her, when I challenge her on her behaviour, as far as she's concerned, she's learned all the scripts in the book, and she's behaved exactly as prescribed by the authorities. So what am I complaining about? Well, you're helping them to kill kids. That's not good, right? Doesn't matter, right? It's like because she's following a religious spirit. So the religious spirit is what gives us the enemy's morality and doctrines and a false conscience. which we then put all of our heart into, and it could be Extinction Rebellion or whatever it is, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the enemy can, by substituting the false spirituality, can steal all of our energy from our mind and body, and that's what happens. And because of my family history, intuitively I feel it and I know it. I can see when it's happening. It's but it's taken me half a century of living on this thing to get to the point where I've got a language and a framework to actually pull it apart and understand it, rather than just going, don't like it.
So it's as you say, it's becoming accountable for your own actions and decide. Right. I mean, it's exactly what William and I were discussing this morning. In many ways, you have got to sort of start thinking. I'm not. Yeah, it's that business about. In the past, we sort of said, well, we can. If I don't take the stuff down to the dump and deliver it, we can pay somebody else to do it. Then they set the rules. They decide, well, we'll come on a Tuesday. Oh, that's not very awkward. That's not great for me. Well, you could take it down the dump any time you like, and we still can. You can still put it in your car and drive to the dump and dump it. But you've sort of paying for these services, and that's probably a bad example, but we keep giving away the powers that we have and the accountability that we have, like with children going to school or our health. We could take more guidance on our health, but we know there's a doctor who can give us some pills. So we smoke and we drink and we don't really worry too much about our health because there's somebody who will make sure we don't die too early. But we could do that.
Or someone who may even cause us to die earlier, but we can pretend I won't get criticized for it. Yeah, I did the same smoking and drinking and drugs and everything else as everyone else. Yeah, and then I went off and did the same prescribed remedies for it as everyone else. So nobody can criticize. Right?
Yes.
So the other part to this, which I've had to learn again the hard way, is the only way you can manage the accountability is also to have the grace, mercy, compassion, and forgiveness part. Yeah, it's like particularly compassion for yourself. So the more you take on the responsibility for how you act in this world, whether it could be home educating your children or managing your health for yourself and not just following orders, you're going to screw up. You're going to make mistakes. And the trap people are often caught in is because of pride. They keep on doubling down on their false beliefs and the false morality, and I'll just keep following the doctor. Yeah, it's like I'll take the 15th booster because, well, I come this far, might as well take another one, because they can't admit to themselves they've been fooled or they've been cowardly, and that's the barrier to admitting it's okay to be wrong. It's normal, right? So when you believe that being conscientious and a good person is being right, and in particular being more right than those bad people, you're in trouble. And if you look at the dictionary definition of right, in the 19th century, it was doing what is righteous and holy. If you look at the definition now, it's changed to being doing what is normal and accepted.
Right.
Interesting, that, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
So, but until you're willing to take the deal, as it were, that you're not going to follow the enemy's false morality of contractual morality. You're going to follow more of a Holy Spirit, and that means you're going to have to break some of these contracts, and you're going to have to take the rap for not following the orders and not doing what's legal. So I've got my driving license on my here. I was photocopying it earlier, and under common law, we have a right to travel in our private carriage or conveyance that doesn't require a license. Yeah, you have a horse, you can walk, bicycle, horse with carriage, horseless carriage, all the same thing. Yeah, it's driving is a commercial activity, and a vehicle is being something operated for reward or hire. So we've been tricked into entering into a commercial legal framework via DVLA and the like, and letting go of our common law right to travel. So when the policeman stops you and says, "Excuse me, are you the driver of this vehicle?" No, I'm not driving. No, I'm a private traveller in my carriage or conveyance. Is there a problem, officer? It's and send them away, right? It's like that's what ought to happen.
Yes.
And we've normalised having to get a driving licence, but under false pretext.
Yes.
Don't need one.
It's interesting you say that, because I've got lined up an interview, I think, next week. I'm talking to a chap who has deregistered his vehicle,
Yep.
and he had got a number plate, but it's not on the DVLA. I want to ask him,
Yeah.
A, how he did it, and B, what does the insurance company say about that? And he's got some stuff about common law as well. So this seems to be coming out. I mean, I'm finding more people wanting to talk about this, and they're discovering this sort of area of how we've been deceived, and what should be the case and what isn't. We've been talking for some time, so I need to wrap it up, unfortunately. But you've got a newsletter that you put out. How often do you put your newsletter out, Martin?
Only when I have something to say.
Right. Okay.
Which could be twice in a day sometimes, not very often. Could be 2 weeks between newsletters. So I started the newsletter back in about 2010, talking about telecoms and tech, and it's meandered all over the place as my journey in life has meandered. But funnily enough, I find myself actually back where I started, fighting TV licensing and the BBC, back in the communications space. I spent quite a lot of time writing about the corrupt court system. I would not have believed until I experienced it what's really going on. Utterly stunned. I've literally in front of me, I've got a forgery of Durham County Council, and the local court. It's the Durham County Council pretending to be the court, literally in my hands. Right,
Gosh.
It's like I've got a forgery, and I went to the police to report blackmail and fraud, and they turned me away at the door, wouldn't investigate.
Really?
Yeah.
I know a chap who I talk to quite regularly who is taking a number of people to court on a similar thing. He was put into asylum unlawfully because he wasn't fitting in with the legal courts. And it's very fascinating. He sent me the paperwork, and just reading that is extraordinary. So can people get back issues of your newsletter?
Yes, actually, exactly. So basically, everything I do is free. There's some people who support me voluntarily because the work I do is quite public spirited. So if you go to newsletter.martingeddes.com, so martingeddes.com, but I'm easy to find.
It'll be in the description.
In the description. It's and I've written tons of stuff out there over the years. So the book is at openmindschange.com. It's available as a free download. The purpose of it, I got the banned first edition, the banned second edition, and what you've got is the third edition. So all it does is offers a bit of hope and teaches you how to think straight. And I've also written a whole bunch of essays around those Q drops and what was really going on. I've been libeled in the Evening Standard, Newsweek, and Financial Times for my efforts. But if you go to onq.martingeddes.com, you can not only download it all for free, it's public domain, so you can even publish it yourself if you want.
Well, it's so far. I mean, we could talk about this for ages and ages, as you say, and it's a fascinating subject. And as I'm sort of on my journey, and I'm quite early on my journey, and I'm speaking to many people on different sort of these, but they're all sort of interlinked. There's something to do with the the way that we've been lied to, the sort of freedoms that we ought to have that we don't seem to have, and the control that some people seem to want to have on us. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are waking up at the moment as well, which is good.
You need to be free in your heart first. Until you're free in your own heart, you're not free anywhere.
And on that, we will end. Thank you so much, Martin, for your time. It's so very, very kind of you. So I'll leave the link in the description, so do check out Martin's newsletter and all the other bits and bobs. And it says on here, as banned by Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Can people buy that online?
Actually, it's now available on Amazon, I believe.
Oh, right.
So
there you go.
By another way.
Excellent. If I can find the link, I'll put that as well. Martin, so nice to talk to you, and thank you for giving me up your time. It's been really, really interesting. Interesting. So thank you, lovely viewers, and I will be back hopefully with some more interesting guests in the future. Thank you, and goodbye.